All right, we are live. Chris, how you doing?
Oh, quite well. Rested and vested.
Awesome. Same here. Um, I yeah, okay. So I was trying to think of a few things, but yeah, okay. So we're just gonna talk about how people change, or at least how you've changed and I've changed over the years. How old are you right now?
I am currently 32 years old.
32. Okay. Um, at what age, when you look back and think about your life, at what age do you feel like you started thinking about things of value?
In the sense of like value to me or like monetary value.
So yeah, value to you, but like in a different way than like I feel like kids just naturally are some form of I mean, I guess we're all some form of selfish, but at some point in my teenage or late teenage years, I started like challenging the religion I was brought up in, and then I got out of religion. I was like pondering different like moral ideas that don't directly affect me that led me to like veganism and some different things like that. Do you remember when you started thinking about things in the realm of like politics or morals and just started thinking outside of like what you're going to do each day that brings you joy?
Yeah, actually, I remember not really having an idea of self as like an individual, as like being a little kid, just existing, not having a whole lot of like memories that really stood out to me from that time frame, but never really having that like consistent understanding of like me, I am a person.
Mm-hmm.
But I developed that around the age of 10, like an identity of self.
Oh, okay.
And it specifically coincided with my youngest sibling at the time being raised by my grandparents as well. Because then it was like we were both latchkey kids at the same time. And like I never really thought of the outside world outside of my mind in any constructive manner until like this smaller kid was now essentially someone I had to take care of.
Mm.
Like it was looked upon me to like make sure that they eat or make sure that they're not dying for at least like a few hours every day. And I was just
Mm.
like I never really thought about the context of caring for others. Like I had the general sense of like I don't want to hurt other people, sure, but I never really thought in the sense of like the level of care that I was developing for myself in a practical manner of just like being able to use the microwave or being able to like be left unsupervised for hours on end. Like I felt like I was being provided that experience, but I never really consciously took that in until around then.
Gotcha,
And
gotcha. And how old is your sibling when you were
at the
10?
time, about 5 years old,
Oh, okay. Cool.
and it's just like
Um,
they weren't like completely helpless, but like at the same time they were much younger and couldn't do everything themselves.
gotcha, gotcha. And then okay, so you were raised by your grandparents, did you say?
Yeah,
Oh, okay. Is it okay to ask about your parents? Is there a
yeah,
story
of
there?
course. So, like my dad, I didn't meet my father until I was 19.
Hmm.
Um, like he wasn't a part of my upbringing at all, and I only met him on a random chance that one of my brothers on my dad's side reached out to me.
Oh, wow. Because of like a 23andMe or something like like seeing that you're related and that kind of thing?
No, so the brother that reached out to me was dating a girl that I used to go to school with, that I was
Mm.
like still friends with, and he was just like, "Man, that his name sounds so familiar," and then like brought it up to our dad, and my dad's like, "Oh yeah, it's like one of my sons,"
Oh, wow. That's pretty
and
wild.
I'm just like, "Oh," and it was just like I was working night shift at the time, so I would just be up late on my days off, and I get this message at like 2 in the morning from this random person that goes, "Hey, I think you're my brother." And I'm just like, "Oh, sure." I mean, I wouldn't know one way or the other.
Yeah. Did he live nearby?
Yeah, he happened to be in like the same town and everything.
Oh wow.
The reality of my dad being within like 20 minutes of me most of my life was kind of weird.
Yeah, and you didn't know that initially, or you knew that most of your life?
No, I never knew that, not until I
Oh,
was
okay.
19. And it was
What
just
did
like, yeah,
uh
he's
what did
always
your
been
grandparents
around.
tell you about him? Like, did you ask
Um,
about having a dad?
I when I was younger, my mom gave me up to my grandparents when I was one
Mm.
because she was still in high school and could not raise a kid. And so, like at 1 years old, my grandmother took full custody of me. And my mom was in and out of my life, but she's like a addict with she was always like in and out of rehab or in and out of jail and stuff like that. So
Okay.
that's
Currently, is she still having issues with that?
oh yeah, no, like it's been like from when she essentially started using uh like drugs from the age of 10 and hasn't stopped.
Oh, damn.
And she had me when she was 15 years old, 16 days after her 15th birthday.
Mm.
And so I was like, you know, a little young to have kids, but also like she didn't want to she didn't want to raise a kid, and my grandma was willing to take me in. So I didn't go into the foster care system.
Gotcha. I'm gonna segue away from this for the shortest amount of time to talk about drugs really quick. Has your mom's situation influenced your stance on the way that certain drugs should be legal?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the my mother being in and out of my life really like changed my views on like drug use. Like every 5 years, it seems to have some level of effect.
Gotcha. Oh, has it kept you away from drugs personally? And if you don't
Oh,
want to answer that here, you could we can talk about that later.
it definitely had an effect on how I sought out escapism, like using
Okay.
drugs in a way to escape my situation, sort of way. Like
Mm.
when I was young, it was like, oh, drugs literally destroy your life. Like there's no two ways about it. Even seeing marijuana demonized as like a relevant piece of that puzzle,
Mm.
and then becoming a teenager and angsty and hateful and seeing it more as like a disease that is, destroying everyone it touches. And then also then having a level of self hate for a while, where then I was using primarily just party drugs, though. I never went that hard. So it'd just be like, oh, like drinking, smoking weed, doing mushrooms. It's just like doing that in the idea that I hated addicts and I wanted to feel like I was doing addict behavior to continue the circle of self hate.
Mm.
But that eventually gave way to like a better understanding, meeting more people that are within like the addict communities and stuff gave me
Mm.
a broader perspective, which then led it to more about like treatment and like the idea that it is a sickness and that we need to help those that are sick, even if it's like it's a sickness, but they're making choices that aren't helping them, and trying to find the line between like the free choice situation, but also like the systemic situation in which they find themselves.
Mm.
And then now it's like I feel like uh, my feelings on drugs are more in line with the fact that we have much bigger fish to fry. Like the addict problem
Gotcha.
is bad, but I feel like it's hard to put as much effort towards it when there seems to be like anything from various forms of violence to like climate change, stuff like that. Like the
Gotcha.
scope seems much broader, and so I don't put as much time into developing an idea of how I would help addicts if I ever had like a realistic chance, or just how I would better interact with my mother now. Even though she's
Mm.
still an addict, she still participates in a lot of drug use. And I'm like, I can suggest so many things. I can tell her all the statistics. I can give her an opportunity to do better in so many different ways, but it's not changing
Mm-hmm.
anything in her life. And it's not, and all it is for me is like, it feels like it's just wasting time,
Yeah.
but it doesn't change. Like, I'd still vote for like social change and governmental change towards drug use and addicts and stuff, but on a
Gotcha.
personal level and personal use, it doesn't really affect anything. Like, my mom has definitely made it very clear that she's going to continue using, and I'm not going to like
Mm.
be mean to her or ostracize her, but at the same time, I'm not sending her links to anything anymore.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, like yeah, yeah, it's a wild topic. I'll share. You might already know this because we might have talked about it before, or you might have heard me talking to somebody else about it. But I'll share my thoughts on the legalization of hard drugs really quick, and then you can just let me know if that sounds about how you feel, or how if you feel slightly different. So
Okay.
the vibe I get, I don't know what percentage of drug addicts, like adult drug addicts right now, I don't know what percentage of them started before the age of 18, but I would guess it's a good amount. Similar to smoking cigarettes and alcohol, uh, almost every cigarette smoker I've ever met says if they never started when they were a teenager or even younger, then like as an adult they would never like start for fun. They just did it when they were a kid and they got addicted and then they can't stop. So because of that issue, like I don't know how many people, but in your mom's case, if somehow she never got the opportunity when she was 10, if she didn't have an opportunity till she was 18, then maybe with a more developed brain she would have not done that thing. So when it comes to the law, my biggest concern is having it be accessible to children. And so even in the case of only selling it to adults, the way we sell cigarettes and pot to adults, I still think it has the issue of people getting it to children. So I think when it comes to, let's say, meth and heroin, that both of those things should be perfectly legal for any adult that wants to do it, but they have to go into a facility where a professional helps them shoot up or take in the drug however they want to take it in. They have their high there. And I don't even care if they create super fun places to do it. You can have rooms with couches and perfect lighting and the best music, and friends can go in there and do it together. But adults
Yeah.
have to do it in
Heroin
a
Chuck E.
building.
Cheese.
Right, exactly. But it has to be adults, and they have to be in a building, and they can't leave the building with any of the product. I think something like that would keep it it would make it where, since it's available and legal, you wouldn't have as much or much at all of people selling it on the streets. And therefore, since it can't leave the building, you would have even less than now cases of youngsters getting it offered to them at like middle school parties and stuff.
I mean, I don't disagree with the idea of a recreational places to use drugs. I mean, I'm all for like third places as in general. A
Mm.
renaissance in third places just sounds great, but then having like designated places to utilize drugs would be like a safe and interesting environment, especially for an adult. But like,
Mm-hmm.
my mom didn't use it because start using because of like social pressure or being offered it sort of thing. It was more
Mm.
of like being gang raped at 10,
Oof.
and then essentially following this like length of trying to escape the experiences that then mostly are associated with the use of drugs, which just
Mm.
downward spiral from there, which is tough.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Like, if people want it, a lot of those people are going to figure out a way to find it no matter what you change. So,
Well,
yeah.
she also became a relatively prolific meth cook from like 19 to 22. So it's
Oh, wow.
like she couldn't purchase it on the quantities that she wanted anymore, and was running out of money because her dad died and she took a lot of an inheritance and swindled both of her siblings out of inheritance from her dad, and then
Oof.
used that to start like a meth empire for a very small time.
Oh,
And
wow.
that was like the first time I went and saw my mom in prison was after she got pinched.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. And so
Yeah, but
she lost everything at that point.
it was like one of many times in her life where like she would do something that would like get her some level of comfort, which then would then just then lose it in some spectacular fashion. But like
Gotcha.
it got to the point where she was just like, you know what, I can just make it at this point instead of having to like rely on a dealer.
Yeah.
And it's like for me, I see instead of being like worried about it like getting into the hands of children situation, I'm like, we have such a vast network of people that create drugs, and then like most kids these days too are more about prescription drugs because of how easily they can get them just from their parents' medication cabinets. Like I had a
Mm.
sibling that's how they started, where it was on just painkillers,
Yeah.
swiping a few painkillers from our grandma, and it was just like it's such a slippery slope, and there's so many like if have you heard of people that abuse dust off?
I've never heard of Dust Off.
It's the compressed air in a can that people normally use to like clean off your computer
Oh,
keyboard.
okay. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's people that are like addicted to using that. This is like
Is
akin
it
to
like huffing
whippets.
paint?
Yeah, it's like it's like the more closer to like a whippet sort of experience.
Okay.
And then
Interesting.
but it's not like it's not it to me it doesn't sound like fun. And it's not something that
Right.
like we could easily regulate to begin with, especially because it's a somewhat benign thing, or like people that overdose on Benadryl,
Mm.
the robo tripping and stuff. Like I feel that if people want to get high, they're going to get high, and regardless of their age and their and where they are in society. So I think that the main thing would be is just it seems to primarily focus around poor people.
Mm.
And if we can eliminate the level of poverty that leads people to poor decisions frequently, like rich people aren't stealing cars as at the same level as poor people. Rich people aren't utilizing drugs and overdosing at the same level as poor people. Rich people
Mm-hmm.
aren't like stealing to feed their family or stealing to try to move out of their social situation. Like, I mean, unless you want to talk about wage theft, but like
Yeah.
stealing from their neighbors, stealing the more visible thing that people find unpalatable about the poor is like levels of unhoused, not having economic safety, not having the same,
Mm.
levels of security as people that are above them, like primarily when it comes to like monetary. Like
Yeah.
we have a whole lot more of them now, and it's not great. So I was like, instead of focusing on the direct symptom of addicts, instead of trying to look at the broader picture of like what really brings an addict to being an addict. And like in my mom's case, it was like, I mean, they were not like climbing the social ladder or anything as a family, as well as not the wealthiest group on the block, sure, but
Mm-hmm.
being left unattended by her drunk dad to then be gang raped by three other older men. It's like
Mm.
in this social situation, what would have actually helped? Like not having access to hard drugs because my mom's dad was an addict. Like, I mean, he probably would have got them anyways, regardless of the legality of it, because it wasn't legal at the time.
Yeah.
But
What do you think that what do you think is something that specifically in your mom's case, if it was available, would have helped the situation?
I think that with a I think with a change in how there's support for Native Americans when it comes to being able to set up a situation where they can prosper. Like her dad came from the reservation where it's incredibly poor. Like across the United States, we've mistreated our native population for, since white people arrived here to then mistreat Native Americans. Like
Mm.
it's been a constant struggle, and it's like the highest levels of poverty circle around places that used to own slaves and reservations.
Okay. Well, here,
Like,
let me ask you a quick question. And I don't know much about this topic, and hopefully nothing I say sounds offensive. Um,
mm,
so let's imagine starting in the 1970s or something. If somebody was on a reservation, is there anything preventing them from leaving a reservation?
primarily not having enough money to leave. Like,
Okay.
my biological grandfather got out because he met my grandmother, which was on the run from her previous marriage. Like, together they were able to scrape enough money together to get out of there.
Okay. And so, but like, so walking off the land is fine. There's no legal issue of if you are a citizen of a reservation, you are not a
Hmm.
legal citizen of the US or anything weird like that. And so, like, outside of the idea of like discrimination in hiring practices, like, let's say somebody's racist against people that are visibly Native American and don't hire them, outside of that, if you walk off the reservation, get a job, have that money, use that money to rent a house or whatever. Um, there, there's nothing in the way there, right?
No, that's the same thing as like anywhere you go. If you can make enough money to pay rent, you can then live somewhere else. Like that's kind of
Okay.
a general human experience, at least in America. But I mean, depending on where you are in America, making enough money to cover rent is in some places impossible. Like by yourself, having
Yeah.
that level of autonomy just isn't attainable. And like trying to live in Jackson Hole is impossible for the people that work in Jackson Hole. Or like even
Mm.
if you go to like places like Portland, it's like your average like studio apartments 14 to 16,000 or $1,400 to $1,600, and it's
Mm.
like there's people here that can work a full-time job at like the Portland's minimum wage, and they will make just above that take home. And
Mm-hmm.
then now you're looking at, oh, you paid rent, but now you have no money for food, medical insurance, if you have to have a car for where you live, or I mean, there's a okay public transportation system, but depending on where you work, it's like, do you want to add 2 hours to your commute every day, or do you want
Mm.
to bite the bullet, buy a car, and have like a couple hours to yourself? It just kind of becomes like at that point you pick up another job, but now your whole
Mm-hmm.
life is working. Like you are
Yeah.
literally just a cog in the machine with no the only level of you're essentially just doing your best to not starve to death and not being able to do anything else with your life.
Yeah. Well, and the transition can be really tough too, because if you walk off of a reservation, in between that moment and getting a job, you might do something that you might have to do something that leads to jail time or drug use. If the only thing you can find is helping somebody sell drugs or like being a stripper for a couple months until you can get on your feet. And so, yeah, I definitely see the potential downsides.
Well,
But
you're
as
also
far,
leaving behind your community as well. Like everyone you grew up with
yeah.
isn't walking off the res with you. The family and support that has given you the chance to survive as far as you have, because that's like with low income to no income, like your only way to survive is relying on others.
Okay. Well, okay. Well, let me talk about that in possibly the most ignorant way possible. Just because again, I don't know much. So, like, initially, even though so many things probably went wrong and shouldn't have happened the way they happened, initially, the idea of reservations, if they went the way they were discussed, is probably a good or important thing for native tribes when the transitional period was happening. But at this point, what pops into my mind that would make most sense, since anybody can, if they can get a job and get money and get houses and whatever, anybody can do that if they can do that. So what I feel would make sense, because yeah, you wouldn't want to leave your people behind. Everybody has people in a sense, and in some cases it's direct, like bloodline of like tribes of people, and then in other cases it's just their immediate family and whatnot. So like I wouldn't want to leave behind my siblings or my cousins or whatever. I love that I live near them all. And in some cases people wouldn't, if the only living humans of your entire like group are all within a range and there's only a few hundred of them left, or 1,000, then people wouldn't want to leave that type of people behind. So what would make sense in my mind, if there is an issue between deals with the government and reservations and all this, would be a group of Native Americans that live on a reservation, like some portion of them that all agree on it, to go, hey, let's walk off this place. Let's all get work and work together. And whether they're direct, like, relatives or just part of the same tribe, help each other get on their feet and do all these different things, and just be part of the citizens of the U.S. that aren't connected to this strange idea that happened a while back about creating reservations. I accept that that might be the most ignorant statement ever, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, like first, kind of going at the idea of like specific groups, like you see this a similar issue with people trying to leave their faiths. Like if you leave, like many of the denominations of Christianity, you when you leave them, you're no longer, in their in group. You're no longer getting that support. Or even if you go
Mm,
towards like Islamic faith, some people are really hard line on that. If you go to the more traditional Jewish people, it's like you leave, you're gone, you're dead to them. Mormons have excommunication. Like you have all
mm,
these levels of like it doesn't have to be tribal mentality, or even just blood related. But like if you are leaning on your local community to have not just like support monetarily, but like emotionally, or like, oh, they help watch the kids, or even going as far as like, this is where I find community. And then now you start developing ideas or leave, and now you don't have that community. And I mean,
gotcha.
I'm a social person, so I really like the communities in which I interact with. And if I had
Hmm.
no communities to interact with, I'd be pretty sad.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
no,
for
I mean that's a good point.
some people it's a lot farther than just sad. So, but
Yeah.
outside of that, like, are you asking for like a better solution besides
Well,
staying on the reservation, or
I'm
like,
just wondering. So I don't know all the details of what makes a reservation bad or good. I'm just wondering that if it is indeed bad for most, why why they don't just leave it? Because
mhm,
at some point it's just a thing that existed because of a situation in time, right? So like right now we're like what 250 years from the start of the US. But
mhm,
what about 5,000 years from now or 10,000 years from now? The idea of there being a group of people based on their race living in a pocket of an area, because however many 10,000 years ago this one group went to this group and conquered them and set this up. Like at some point the idea of a reservation doesn't make sense to me even if it is flourishing, but it really doesn't make sense to me if it's not flourishing. Why,
mhm,
like if right now, if somehow I became homeless right now and lost all my people around me, I would try to make friends and do the kind of work I could do to get some like landscaping or berry picking or whatever the most available work is, save up money if I could, try to figure something out. And I'm just
mhm.
trying to figure out what would be keeping your average Native American on a reservation versus doing anything else aside from the good answer you just gave me of not wanting to leave your tribe.
Well, for me personally, that would be like my reasoning. But outside of just asking someone that's on a reservation right now, why do they not leave? That would probably be your
Hmm.
best way of getting like an actually good answer.
For
Because it's
sure.
like these people are, I mean, most of them are not prospering, but there's a lot of them that are, still alive. They're not dead yet, but
Hmm.
there's a lot of native girls go missing every year.
Hmm.
A lot of people, there's suicides pretty high. The need for dentists in most reservations pretty high, just because it's
Hmm.
like they're living on government subsidies in some cases, or in some cases it's more about the availability of stuff because a lot of reservations aren't on the most fertile of land. Like they're
Gotcha.
not able to make the land that they were given better.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
was the point, though. Like it wasn't for like the idea of a reservation wasn't to give a people group a space to prosper while the rest of their ancestral land is destroyed and ravaged for the uses of capitalism primarily.
Hmm.
Like it wasn't it wasn't there for them to succeed. It was primarily there for them to eventually die. Like
Hmm.
if they didn't die on the trip there, it's like looking at how everything was set up. It wasn't intended for them to succeed. But then
Hmm.
just leaving the reservation, it's like you can leave behind. It's kind of like, would you leave your home that's paid off?
Gotcha. Okay,
It's
because
a
there
it's
is
a
a
com-
benefit. There's just not a way to really go up and up.
think of it more in the sense of like generations of your family have been given a space that you won't specifically starve to death, but you aren't going to like thrive. And this is generations of only really knowing that outside of like some people leave, sure, and some people push for like, let's do better.
Hmm.
But in the end, it's like, which is easier to do, to work to work extraordinarily hard against the grain, against the wishes of the people that originally set this trap for you, or to continue to you know exist under something that is not comfortable, but you're not dying.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just curious because of your wording, no judgment at all. But
Hmm.
do you think it's fair to refer to people of a same race as people that did an action in the past as setting up a trap? Now, there might be current issues happening right now, but let's imagine that there's not a current bad action. There just hasn't been improved. If if people set up reservations in a negative way and we could both agree to call those people having done bad actions, is it
Hmm.
fair to say that leaving your reservation and just joining the rest of society, the rest of the mixed races and genders and whoever lives in the US, that joining them isn't giving in to the people that trapped you? It's it's working with people that happen to be of the same race, of people their ancestors trapped your ancestors, but there's no real connection today.
So this is like the whole like, should white people be punished for owning slaves if their family owned slaves back in the day?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, basically, it's just
Same vein.
wondering. Like we all say things the way we say them, and it's just
Hmm.
casual talking. But you just mentioned the idea of if they leave the reservation and work for the people that trapped them. And I just don't think of any human still alive unless you're referring to political decisions about reservations today. I don't think of the white man or the American black man or the American Asian or any of that as people that trapped any Native Americans.
So yeah, the you wouldn't think of it in the sense of like a specific white, because white itself is like a concept that doesn't exist. I mean, in quotations, white people are primarily like you got German, French, English, even some Spanish and Italian. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, back in the day, they didn't consider Italians white, but they didn't consider Irish white, and they seem to be the whitest of them all.
Mm.
But the concept of whiteness is, a made up concept primarily by racist people.
Okay.
And the idea that a skin tone caused a specific thing instead of a mindset behind people is a little strange, because it's like white people weren't the issue. It was the people that thought white people as a race were more important than other people. And like
Mm.
you can point to specific figures that were like spearheading these things. Like there's a whole rogues gallery worth of primarily white people that pushed rhetoric that then led to the death and the subjugation of primarily not white people. But if you look at like the Native American situation, it's like, sure, there was a lot of people that primarily wanted this to happen, that wanted the reservation situation to go as poorly as possible. Like even Abraham Lincoln ordered the death of Native Americans,
Mm.
like the literal death of Native Americans. And
Hmm.
like I'm not going to hold Abraham Lincoln's bloodline accountable for that.
Yeah.
It's the sins of your father situation. But the ideas that were perpetrated that allowed that to happen still permeate through our culture today. Like it's less
Mm.
about a people group of like by skin tone or by generational lineage or even by like nationality. Like I'm not going to be like the Swedes are the worst. The even third generation Swedish people in America. Like
Mm.
it's the mindset of capitalism, the governing body that hasn't really changed that much, as well as the people that continue to prop that up. Abraham Lincoln's lineage may not be pushing for the death of Native Americans now, but the companies that are continuing to push sugar as the first and foremost in our country, they're, not just killing natives, they're killing us all, but sugar's the devil,
Yeah.
as you know. Um,
I'm with you on that. Do you think there are specifically outside of the idea of some people just thinking that their race is the best and they don't like any other races? Do you think that there are are people in power that have anything specifically against Native Americans?
I think that there are people that probably hold that in their heart. Like, I feel that racism in itself, being conscious or unconscious, exists on some level to everybody. I don't think there's a non racist person. I think that
Gotcha.
people that say they're not racist are either not examining their what they do in a level that would actually provide them the insight they're looking for,
Hmm.
or they are lying. Like they're ignorant or
Interesting.
they're lying. There's a level of racism to everything, and if you
Hmm.
don't think you're racist, you just haven't examined enough of your life to know where you're being racist. Like
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't think that people should be like hemming and hawing and hand wringing over the fact that they're probably still racist. They should just do the footwork to figure out where are they being racist? Is it conscious? Is it unconscious? Is it something they grew up with? So on and so forth. But
Yeah. What's
I
an
think
example
that
of the last situation where you've tried to discover where you were racist and you found it?
for me, I actually, so I was talking about the various books I was reading at my current job, and someone brought up a book that they were reading that I never even thought of. Like, I never thought of segregated mental institutions.
Oh, okay.
Like, I
Is that a
never even
thing?
thought it 100%. Like, it's a great book. The book's called Madness. And it's a deep dive into a segregated um mental institution that was originally built by uh, essentially slaves and had operated from slavery time all the way up until like 2008.
Oh, interesting.
It was built over in Maryland, and this book it was like it starts off with how the buildings were constructed originally, and it was just people that the denizens of Maryland did not want on the street or were the mentally infirm, and every one of them just happened to be black. And
Mm.
they essentially were used as slave labor to build the institution that they were institutionalized in over
Mm.
the course of several years. And it goes downhill quite quickly from there. But I never thought about, like, I never thought of a place for the treatment of people of color for mental illness. Like, like nowadays, I don't really think much of like, now I do, but like as of recently, as of 6 months ago, I never really thought about like institutionalized people that much to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
So it was already somewhat of a blind spot. But then I didn't even think about the historical ramifications of like having a segregated mental institution, and then what sort of atrocities would have happened behind the closed doors of somewhere that already is highly abusive towards various different groups of people. But I never thought
Gotcha.
about it as like a what would a a person that is struggling with their mental health be experiencing under an all white staff during Jim Crow era experiences
Mm.
with like no regulation or oversight.
Yeah.
And it turns out it
Yeah.
was horrifying.
Yeah, no, that seems like a very interesting topic, and it seems like it would definitely be horrifying. How does that connect to the idea of you feeling like you have some racism within yourself?
Oh, I thought of like mental institutions as primarily for white people to get better. Like I never even really thought about like
Oh,
non-white people existing in those spaces.
you're viewing that thought as on the spectrum of having a slightly racist thought.
Oh, I don't even think of it as slightly. I mean, like I never even thought of like anyone outside of white. Like most movies and media that depict a that setting primarily has maybe like one or two people of color, but it's mostly white.
Hmm.
Like
But
one
I'm not
flew
sure
over
if
the
I get
cuckoo's nest. Or,
what exactly is it that you view as racist about like if you think of a mental hospital and an image pops into your head, you think all the crazy people in there are white. What exactly would you find racist about that? And we might have to define terms of like what racism is, but just you don't have to yet. I'm curious what you find
yeah,
racist
of
about
course.
that.
Specifically, the idea that those places are supposed to be for like they're hospitals for your brain, and that then that resource only being utilized by like primarily white people, and within like the zeitgeist of media that we consume, it's like I could not think of many other situations where anything other than primarily white people were institutionalized with the idea to help. But then the thought of not thinking of other people groups that would also be within the borders of America that would also need that sort of help. Like not
Mm.
even having the idea to perceive a segregated mental institution, it
Yeah,
felt
yeah,
like such a foreign thought that in
yeah.
itself it was like I was removing any people of color from the idea of institutionalization.
Interesting. Yeah, and the word removing is interesting too because there's a difference between not thinking of something and then actively removing something.
Mm,
I will agree. I've never imagined a race of somebody in a mental hospital aside from the image of the large Native American in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest pops into my head. But outside of that, I just view a mental hospital as a mental hospital, and it seems like there has been many wrong things that have happened in those over the years.
hmm Oh yeah.
But outside of that, I view it as here's a building for people that have mental issues, and then anybody could have mental issues, and in whatever race you are. And if just so happened that there were some races that somehow never had people that had mental issues, then that would just be how those cards aligned. Um, I don't think of the idea that I've never thought of races in mental hospitals as me removing something, but I also don't think of it as a racist act. It's okay if you view it as thinking of it as a racist thought yourself. I guess what I would say now, though, now that you have viewed that as some form of a racist thought, now that you've thought it over further, and now that you don't have that thought of what you're calling removing them from the idea of what happens in mental hospitals, do you view that as fixed in as far as in your mind of the idea of you being racist because of it?
I don't think it's fixed.
Like
Primarily
in
just
your own
because
mind, it's not fixed?
I don't think so, because it's something that like I'm still reviewing as a person. Like, what would have even led me to not having like an entire people group within a specific structure? Like, I'm like trying to think of other ways I could maybe suss out where else do I have this level of blind spot, because
Okay.
it's like I'm not being malicious with it, sure, and it's not something that would affect other people. So it's definitely a self burden, because
Mm.
I'm doing it, I'm reviewing it and trying to pose better questions about it to better myself as an individual. And it's not like
Mm.
it affects any of my friends of color. If I think about people that are in mental institutions one way or the other, like it just doesn't affect anybody else. It's like it won't make me a better person, and it won't change like the needle on a global scale or even a local scale, but
Mm-hmm.
examining it myself gives me the opportunity to look at something that already was a blind spot for me, but then turn that lens on other things that I could think of, like the things that I already have in my mind, how I can then change how I look at those using the same lens that I'm now using on the mental institutions of like, especially like Jim Crow era, primarily where the book takes place.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now, and do you personally see a benefit in referring to things like this as racism?
Yeah, it's definitely like looking at it in the lens of just being like, oh, it's just something I don't think about. I feel like diminishes the idea that our country has presented a lot of things in an untrue manner. Like
Mm.
like just thinking about like when I was a kid, I didn't learn much about the concentration camps that we had in America.
Mm-hmm.
Like we had like a brief overlook of that during like social studies, but like talking to my like great aunt that was in a concentration camp in California and getting to go there with her and like talk about how many people didn't survive and that they were literally put there because they were Asian,
Mm-hmm.
not just like she's Korean, she's not Japanese, but she was still put into a Japanese internment camp.
Oh,
And
interesting. Was that due to just anybody that looked like they could be Japanese would go in there, or is there more reason behind that?
so it's pretty much it was primarily Asian looking people that were near any like military bases or installations, but there also
Mm.
seemed to be a level of it of just removing primarily Asian business owners
Mm-hmm.
from their businesses that they would be running. Like a large percentage of them were, if you look Asian and you happen to have some level of clout, or if you have a business, you are a landowner, you got put into a concentration camp, and maybe you'll get your stuff back after the war, but if you survived being in the concentration camp, and it's just like it was something that I never even thought about as a kid. We didn't really touch on in school, and then like learning that it was just like a foundational experience of one of my family members. Like they were relatively young for that experience, and none of it was good. And I would have had more family if it didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a very wild situation. I don't know too much about that topic. Yeah, the race thing is very tricky. I don't think there's any right or wrong way to do it. I don't
I think there's
know.
wrong ways to do it.
Right. Yes. I guess what I'm saying is I don't think what you're saying is necessarily wrong.
Mhm.
I like the idea of reserving a term like racism or racist in a for the people that at very least have a negative thought towards people of a different race than their own. Um,
Mhm.
or various different other reasons outside of a thought, even control over, power over, um, harmful actions, all these different things. But
Mhm.
this idea of there being a spectrum that we all fall under it, I that's just not the view that I see, because I know myself. I know
Mhm.
that like I somebody's skin color um, does not impact my thoughts of them as humans in any way. There could be situations where, because of enough things I experience, it could make me think, it could make my intuition in a moment seem somewhat potentially negative. And then pondering it with any form of reason, I wouldn't feel that anymore. So like the closest example I can think of would be if back to back, you can pick any race, it really doesn't matter. Um, if back to back, the next 10 times I see maybe a video of somebody arguing for or doing a speech or whatever, and let's say it's coming from a Hispanic person. Um, if I see 10 things back to back of Hispanic people saying the most horrible things I can imagine, then the next time I see a Hispanic person on the street, my intuition, because we evolved to react to
Pattern recognition.
experiences, yeah, I might like have some like kind of like sad thought or angry thought in my head when I see them, and then obviously like within seconds I'd go like, oh, that's interesting how humans work, that I saw all these negative things and then this. And that happened, I noticed it happen a couple times in my life, around the time of like the George Floyd situation, where I would see enough people saying horrible things like of a certain
Mhm.
race, or it even might happen with gender, where if I see enough modern day feminists say something extreme enough, then I could just see some random woman and go like, "Oh, women." But I am only thinking that for like a split second, and it's because of some experiences or whatever. But outside of that, I just don't. I don't think there's any benefit to view somebody that doesn't think of race in any way as there being like racist things to work on.
Yeah. No, I can't disagree with like I mean how you're taking racism in that way. It's like I don't think that's wrong either. I think that if that's the most equitable way for you to view it, then I mean you're not out there like attacking people of color, so it's like yeah, that's good.
Well,
But
not only that, I don't think of race as having any effect on a thing. I can imagine. I try to put myself in the shoes of people that are part of what we would consider a minority, and so I imagine a world where the majority of people in my own country are could be Asian or could be Hispanic or could be black or whatever, where
mhm.
like I'm part of like my race is only 5% or whatever. I could imagine me having a different outlook on life. I could imagine me thinking like, "Oh, this feels somewhat different to see the majority of people not look like me or whatever." And
Mhm.
there's feelings like that that you just can't not notice. You can't not recognize. So I get the idea that like Hispanic people, I think, are maybe one of the least represented people in movies. Maybe there's more Hispanic people in the U.S. than black, but there's more black people in movies than Hispanic. So, like, I could see like every time a Hispanic person turns on the TV, that they might go like, "Oh man, I never see people that look like me or whatever," and that can be a feeling that pops into their head or whatever. And I don't think that necessarily means that the people making movies need to do this or that or whatever. It's just like there's a difference between ideas of race popping into one's head, and then the range of anything from negative thoughts of race or negative harmful action or all these different things. And I just feel like racism seems like the type of thing that should be thought of as somewhat of a bad thing, and something tells me that any form of anything that we're going to think of is racist of you, Chris,
Mhm.
is going to be not a bad thing. So this idea of you having never thought of mental hospitals involving black people, that's not a, I don't think of that as a bad thing. And I doubt you could come up with anything about yourself involving your personal thoughts on race as a bad thing.
I think of it less as like I can see it in one way being a bad thing, but in the like grand scheme of it, like it's not hurting anybody. It's not like hurting me. It's not it's not, you know, creating any negative thoughts or anything. It's the way I would see racism instead of seeing it as like primarily a negative thing or like having the connotations of like racism means bad thing involving race. Instead, seeing it more about like because I see the racism topic itself extending beyond just like hate speech slurs or actively harming others, but then also
Mm.
seeing it as like any aspect of anything that has been affected by like racial reasonings, racial standards. And
Mm.
I mean, you can like looking hard enough at so many things, you can find like racist things that had led to certain things, domino effect sort of situation. Like looking at the lack of generational wealth in Black communities stemming from the economic boom after World War II, where redlining was a big thing, where primarily it was
Mm.
white GIs with white families getting the desirable land, though that which now is, you know, worth you know, exponentially more. Or looking in the sense of when slavery was ended, like they put in place a lot of laws that primarily would then put people in jail where slavery still existed.
Mm.
The Jim Crow era laws, some of them that are even being revised and revived today. Reservations weren't made for Native people to prosper. It was for them to, you know, not exist anymore, or at least be so far out of the way they wouldn't be in the cultural mind of what was now becoming white people's land. And then whenever native land is like it's it's less about the race and more about if it's profitable or not, because every
Mm.
time native land becomes profitable, it now gets annexed by the United States government, or they have to build a pipeline through it, or like
Mm.
there's so many things that then disrupt these groups, like gentrification of what became black areas now because they're profitable, being priced out and being pushed out primarily by people that are considered white. And it's like I don't think it's racist as much as it is profit driven in a lot of those cases, but the racism's still there. Like the
Mm.
profits are being created at the expense of people of color.
Okay.
And that's where
Well,
it's like I don't think of it in terms of like good or bad. Like I think racism overall is bad, sure, but I think that it just the extension of it can be personal biases, but also could be, you know, government laws. It could be generational. It could be individual. Like I don't feel like it needs to be tied to specifically, you know, hate crimes. But I think that also the view of it being as just a bad thing, I feel like stigmatizes it to the point that a lot of people don't want to dwell on the bad stuff. People aren't looking to reflect on bad things as much as they're wanting to like, oh, but look at the progress we've made. We don't own people anymore. There are, you know, black people that are succeeding. We had a black president, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
mm. Okay.
But it's
Well,
like,
would you think of how you view racism in the sense that you think that everybody has it to some spectrum degree
mm,
as synonymous with maybe um, ignorance of racial anything? Like the idea that you were ignorant of the idea of black people in mental hospitals or whatever. That was a racist thing until you became aware of it. And so anything that somebody is not aware of involving race, that's how you prefer to use racism? Just being aware?
I think that one of them would be, I think one part of it would be that because like you're the unknown unknown is really hard to learn on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like if you don't know something, like if you don't think about racism often, or if you don't know something could be perceived as racist, it's like, how would you know until someone else told you? Like, I didn't even think about this until a literal book. I had to read a book about it. Like, it never even crossed my mind. And the basis of the idea is based in race. And like, it wouldn't exist without it. Like,
Mm,
racism built those structures, racism perpetuated it until that building was condemned. Like, the book itself talks about how it's like the levels of disdain for a specific group of people because of the color of their skin, and the
mm,
lack of any, like, in my personal opinion, like, the logical reasoning for
mm,
me isn't there. But for people at that time, it's like you're keeping an out group out, you're keeping a subhuman in their place. Like, the historical ramifications of it were definitely justified in those people's minds.
mm.
And to me, today, right now, it seems so wild to treat people differently in the concept of race versus, like, treating people differently according to their needs versus treating people differently according to what they look like.
Mm, mhm.
Like, I think that people need more should get more, and people that need less should get less. That makes sense. But like, people that are darker skinned should get less. That's the negative racism in that sense. But
Yeah.
that's something that was just considered okay for
Hmm.
so long in this country.
Gotcha. Okay, so I'm gonna save that element for a different talk. I think that's a very important thing. I do want to run a scenario past you to see if this fits into what you view as racism. So let's imagine a situation where we have a person. They're 25 years old, and let's say this person is white. Let's say this person has zero interest in ever learning about history. They don't want to know anything that's happened before the day they were born. No interest in history. Anytime somebody brings it up, they say, "I don't want to hear about history. I'm walking over here."
I think
This
I've met this
person,
person.
well, not yet. Hold on. This person is a minimalist to the extreme. They live in a tent, and let's say for the rest of their lives, they're going to be able to find different places they can set up their tent and just live the most minimal life possible. They don't work or anything. They just are living, and they go foraging and they eat off the land. And some people give them some food every once in a while, and they have nice, friendly conversations with people. No matter what, whoever they talk to of any race, if race is ever brought up as a topic, they just say, "Oh, sorry, but it's not an interest of mine," and they want to walk away. And they spend their entire lives from, let's just say, from birth to death. They live 100 years, and they never talk about race, and they never learn about history at all, let alone history of race.
Mhm.
Would you say that this choice of theirs, and they're not living off of any benefit that has come from race, at least from this scenario I'm giving you, do you think that this person who never has ever talked about, never has acted upon any racial anything, and doesn't even want to learn about history, is there a racist element? Do you think that it is in some form racist to have zero interest in learning about history, including race?
I guess the my first question is, what race is this person?
We're going to call them white for the sake of figuring out if you view them as racist.
Well, because primarily I was thinking people that live the hermit lifestyle. I mean, depending on where you are in the world and living the hermit lifestyle, and like, the color of your skin can matter on how much you're going to get hassled.
Hmm. Let's say this person's not hassled at all. It's just figuring out if you think humans, um, in general, as being humans, or in our current society, um, if they have almost a moral obligation to learn certain things.
I don't think that. So this person that lives outside of our society wouldn't be a very good measure for our society
Well,
in that
when I
sense.
say society, I guess I just mean like in this case, we can just be talking about our country, the U.S. And so this
Hmm.
person lives in the country. They just live. They just pack up their
Live
tent and
removed.
yeah.
They live removed from society.
Mhm.
I mean, that wouldn't be a good gauge for society, though, would it? Like,
Well, it's mostly just trying to figure out if you think humans that live today in a world where at various different times in the past we have different
mhm.
things like the camps for the Japanese, we have slavery when we had it, we have things that we might view as um, negative effects that have happened over the years because of some of those things. And
Mhm.
I'm just wondering if you think it's almost a must to learn that history in every situation, including this minimalist individual that never wants to think about race at all, but not in a negative way. They just want to live their lives having the greatest relationships and conversations, and they just in their mind have zero interest in history and zero interest in the topic of race, and they don't think anything based on race
So,
that they know
yeah,
of.
I think this person exists in many places. Like, if you live in an insular space that has very little interaction with other races, it's pretty easy to not talk about racism. Especially, like, I mean, nomadic, poor person living off of the land. Like, that's one way to do it. Or just be like, make six figures and live in Lake Oswego. Like, you can get away with it.
Mhm.
But I think that even if you even if you go out of your way to never learn anything about the world that's around you, like you can still survive. Like, it's not going to change if you can eat or not. Like, understanding racism for most people is not going to change if they can see the next sunrise. So I don't feel like
Mm.
it's necessary. And then when it comes to morality, like, I mean, if you can have good morals or not good morals and still succeed or fail in this world, like, I don't feel like morality has a lot of weight when it comes to things, especially because
Mm.
morality in itself is like most people will decide what moral is one way or the other personally, and that's usually
Mm-hmm.
created through the scope of their social circles, their upbringing, and societal norms. So it's like, I mean, being unwed with two kids was worthy of getting stoned to death in Bible times, like, and that was
Mm.
considered morally correct.
Mm.
And like, there's people here in this current country that their morals say that, like, gays shouldn't get married, and for
Mm.
some reason that's like so bad. But
Mm.
then there's other people that are like, well, I mean, morally speaking, everything should be free, and that we're wealthy enough that no one should own anything. Like, morality is in itself such a personal thing. So for me
Yeah.
personally, I think it's morally wrong to be ignorant, but I also understand that everybody's ignorant of something and that we can never fully know everything. And even the
Mm.
greatest minds were ignorant of something. So it's the
Gotcha.
constantly striving to know more and do better. I personally want that for me, but I don't want to
Mm.
say that I think it's morally wrong to not like be constantly trying to learn and trying to better yourself. But I'm not going to
Okay.
say that that's something that's important to other people, or that other people should be held to the same moral standards as I am.
Yeah. No, and I get that. And so I think that's the main difference between our definitions of racism and what we
Yeah,
think racism should mean is yours
well, I think that
involves
yours
the idea of
is,
ignorance and mine
yeah.
only includes intention.
Yeah,
And
and
so,
that's where
yeah.
it's like, I think that yours is fine. Like, you're not gonna do hate speech because of the way you see it, and I think mine, in the sense, like, I want to expand it more, do more with it,
Hmm.
and it's not going to lead to negative things. It just helps me, where I feel that you shouldn't have to think of it in the same way. If you
Gotcha.
did, that's great, and if you think of it in a different way, even better. Like, it's the idea of growth. I think that a lot of people try to push this idea of like, we're good enough or we were better at a previous time. And
Mm.
I think that in itself is false. So I think it's the idea of like the like being mean to people of color is racism. And I'm like, that's fine, but why can't we expand it more?
Yeah, yeah,
It's a
interesting.
social construct. Like, why can't we do better or create a bigger idea or expand it beyond the what was considered traditional borders of thought in like the 1950s? Like,
Hmm.
that's where it's like I think that you don't need to, you don't have to do better or in what I consider better. It's just different. It's not really better.
Mm,
It's
gotcha.
not it's not good or bad. I don't think your version of racism is bad and mine's superior.
Hmm.
But in my mind, I see growing the idea of racism and how it affects the world around me and what is truly considered racist as a better option than just staying with a rigid confine of like it just being negative stuff or the intention of negative. Like positive intentioned racism would still be an issue for me. Like, you know, telling a black guy you met that you voted for Obama, or like the oh, but you're one of the good ones sort of conversations, or
Hmm.
uh, being like, oh, you're like the good Mexicans that work really hard. I want them here, but I don't want the immigrant ones that are bringing in drugs and are murderers or whatever. Like
Hmm.
this like double speak of an entire people group, and then being like, we just want the good ones.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
I
Maybe that
feel
would
like
be an
there's
interesting conversation too when we talk about race in the future, is to
mm,
take all the Donald Trump quotes and break them down and what we think of them.
I
Um,
there's so many though. Like we do like a 6 day run, have a
right?
panel of guests. Each one gets an. I think that in itself is such a fascinating thing where my grandparents are staunch Republicans,
Hmm.
and my grandfather and even has like the "Make America Great Again" hat.
Hmm.
But like my grandfather was raised in like rural Mississippi where everyone was poor. Like uh, it was he didn't he's like I don't see color because black people didn't have any worse off than white people did in the area I was from. And
Mm.
I was like, yeah, but it's not about if it's better or worse because of the like your upbringing being better or worse because of the color of your skin. But then like you and the kid next door were both poor, but because of the color of his skin in the area, he's going to have different hurdles than the color of your skin in your area. And I
Mm.
mean, I'm not biologically related to my current grandfather because my biological one died. Um, it always seemed a little strange that he was Republican because, like, a lot of the areas that he was from was poor because of Republican rhetoric, Republican laws, and it
Mm.
felt a little strange. And then now with the Donald Trump stuff, it's like, I mean, they the things that they say like being like anti-socialist, and I was like, you're currently using social security as a form of income, which in the basis form of social security is a socialist concept. Like
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
feels weird hearing that sort of rhetoric from people that actively have a better life because they don't live in spaces that are ran by the group that they support,
Hmm.
nor a lot of the like laws and regulations that led to them having a better life were primarily made by centrists to like liberal leaning people. Like it's one of those things that it's hard to it's really hard for me to get into their mindset and try to be like walk a mile in their shoes sort of mindset,
Hmm.
because I feel like they're wrong.
Gotcha,
And
gotcha. Well, I think there's so many areas to hop into. I'm going to make about a dozen notes. Like for example, I'm no Trump fan, but at the same time, I actually would find it hard to consider most of Trump's race-related statements to be what I would consider racist.
Hmm.
or much of a problem. So it'd be interesting to break those down. But the same thing, there's a lot I'd want to break down about socialism, capitalism, what we call these things. So I'm going to make some notes, and we'll have another conversation about it soon. And
Okay.
and it's funny because towards the beginning of this conversation, I segued, which was going to be for a minute, but then I segued so many times, and we never got back to your teenage years and changes and all that stuff, and that's all my fault. But I'm very curious to get back into your development of all these ideas and how they've changed. So, but I do got to run now. But let's have another talk soon.
Yeah, of course. Sounds good to me.
Awesome. Take care, my friend.
All right, you too.